Welcome to SOS Podcast. In this episode, Larry Watson speaks at the Historic Community Church of Boston, Sunday, November 17, 2019. Subject, Liberals and Apologists' Betrayal of the Civil Rights and Social Justice Movements. Here he is accompanied by Desmond Scaife Jr. We present Larry Watson's An Affirmative Action Baby, Unmuted.
We came from a distant land. Our lives already planned. We came in ships from across the sea. We'd never see. And here we are, American fruit with African roots. They made us work from morn till night, never giving human rights. Though time passed on, we did endure. Children sick and no doctors to cure. What is to become of this American fruit with African roots? And I'm proud. I said, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. I said, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. Mississippi, goddamn. Mississippi, goddamn. Mississippi, goddamn. We work from morn to night, never giving human rights. Though time passed on, things remain the same. Black babies born with no last names, and here we are, American fruit with African roots. The time has come, I fought for us to join hands and never be punished by the rules of this land. I fought thought the time had come after Obama, after civil rights and women's rights and gay rights. I thought the time has come for us to join hands and never be punished by the rules of this land. Now that we were aware of what we must do, no longer afraid, no longer a fool. But we're such fools. I was betrayed. We betrayed all of those who gave their lives as we became mesmerized by trinkets, We protected those because they shared the same bloodline. As they shot and killed my children every day in the streets and the cities of this country. And we went and maligned and abused poor nations around the world. And now they swim to try to take back something that we stole. Now that we are aware of our African roots. Aware of our African roots. Sing the names, say the names. We're here today to say the names. We're here today to look in this room at all the great speakers that have come through here, hoping and praying and wishing that we would stand steadfast. Now that we are aware, now that we know that we are inextricably connected, and some have broke the chain. Aware of our African roots. I'm very honored to be here this morning with one of it's like my son, but he's a young man that I have worked with since he was 14. A young man he has worked with since he was 14. That's the first time somebody told me they couldn't hear me. I got a big mouth. Okay, you better move up a little bit, brother. But this is Desmond Scaife Jr., a graduate of Berklee College of Music, and a young black man with incredible ability and talent who too young and too early in his life has already experienced that betrayal that I sing about. F. Seeing such good people here that I know so well. Du Bois, in his book, Souls of Black Folks, gives us all a blueprint for how people of African descent have survived this Ma'afa, M-A-A-F-A, which is what we call our Holocaust. M-A-A-F-A. This presentation is not going to be that long, so you have to go look some stuff up. Because in 2019, I've decided I'm not explaining everything anymore. The betrayal that has occurred in this country means that part of the goodwill in the coalition has been broken. And so those who have good intentions will do their homework and will once again find their voice. And when you find your voice, you share that with your granddaddy and your mama and your sister and your neighbors. And you don't tolerate backwardsness that can mean the difference between life and death for so many children in this country. Let me be clear when I say children in this country. I've had a 25, 30-year career as an educator. The majority of my students that I've taught in those years have been white students, because black students have been marginalized from these institutions, the very institutions that their parents and family members built. Even the music schools that profess to be #1 in the world, we find that they may have in a whole population 50 black students. The very schools that exploited their parents, and people took the money from that exploitation and bought their trailer park homes and sent their kids through college, now cannot afford to go to those schools because they cost $65,000 a year. But we still keep pushing jazz and blues. We still keep making more money off of it as the few survivors of those schools die with no teeth in their mouth and no insurance to bury themselves. It's an atrocity. And every day you come home from that experience, you have to take a bath because you feel so slimy and dirty from what you see going on. And most will be muted and not speak about it. And so I'm unmuted today. Because if you speak about it, then you join places, which we all don't even know we've joined that place, with those who have been attacked and silenced. But these people give me my strength to get up every day. And when I start my walk, many of you sitting in this room give me that extra push to keep going. And what has been my psychiatrist and what has been my therapy has been this rich music that Africans brought to this shore. And they did not get that music for when they arrived, seeing some hillbillies up on a mountaintop and heard them humming a melody, and from that they wrote 600 Negro spirituals. No, we brought it with us. We had melodies. We had harmonies. We may have not had do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, but we had them. And when we could not afford counseling, and when we found support from no place, even not from our own people, because many times they were too afraid, there were these sorrow songs that Du Bois talks about. That's how he starts his book. And when we heard those songs, we drew the strength of the ancestors. Why should I feel discouraged? And why should the shadows come? Why should my heart be lonely and long for heaven, for heaven His eyes is on the sparrow, and I know He watches over me. His eyes is on the sparrow, and I know He watches over me. I sing because I'm happy, and I sing because I'm free. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches over me. I said it again. I sing because I'm happy.
I sing because I'm free. Don't you know God's eye is on the sparrow? Said, and I know He watches me.
Well, I sing because
I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. Yeah, God's eye is on the sparrow. Yes, it is. And I know. Said I know. Yes, I know. I said I know. I know that I know. Know that I know. Know that I know. I know.
He watches over me. Are a people crazy who would sing and say, I'm happy, when they have just lost their child to gun murder by those in the community that are supposed to be protecting us? Would a civil rights leader march and have whites to say, and spit in his children's face? What manner of a people are this that always demonstrated to America and the world what real civility and consciousness was about? And what was the payoff? What was the pass we received along the way? Today I dedicate this performance and these words to great people who mentored me along the way. Why couldn't I just go along and get along? Or as one of my great mentors, the great Dorothy Donegan, a black woman many of you may not know, who is the greatest jazz pianist of the 20th century. You heard me. Dorothy Donegan. And Oscar Peterson and others knew that. But when racism and sexism kicked in, the black woman, Dorothy Donegan, was kicked to the back of the bus. And she said, Larry, And I invoke her today. And you all can look her up too. Look at Dorothy Donegan at the White House. President Clinton had enough sense to try to do the right thing. And she came to that White House to perform along with Herbie Hancock and Chick Corea and all the big ones. And not off the record, but I didn't hear it, but I heard that when they got on the plane to go to the White House, and Herbie saw Dorothy in the back of the plane, and he said, "Is she going? Well, I'll just play first." Now, what is the reference for considering her to be one of the greatest pianists, if not the greatest of the 20th century? How many read those music reviews in your time by a man named Leonard Feathers? Leonard Feathers wrote what was called the Jazz Encyclopedia. And he wrote reviews every week in the New Yorker magazine. Leonard Feathers, you can look that up too. I always try to give references. What is he talking about? She couldn't have been, I don't know her. So if I don't know her, she couldn't have been that good because I'm an aficionado. Well, at any rate, Leonard Feathers wrote, "Dorothy Donegan is the jazz pianist of our time, but she never gets the grants and the accolades she deserves. And so since she didn't get those, she had no choice but to, in some instances, become a caricature. She had to shake her butt, as women were expected to do. And even though she was playing everybody under the table, they then used that very shaking her butt so she could work against her to say she wasn't serious." Same thing said to me when I became a dean at Cornell. My black colleagues told me, "Now you got to stop singing. You can't be an administrative dean at Cornell and still sing. People will discount what you do." Fortunately, I had met Shirley Chisholm as a freshman in college, and she was my representative from Bedford-Stuyvesant. And I read that book, Unbossed. And I realized that Stevie Wonder would say years later, "You can't cash in your face," in one of his lyrics. So as my mother used to say growing up on the farm in South Carolina, she said sometimes her father would say to her, "Boy, I can't get to her or one of her brother, I can't get you to do the right thing. You will neither G nor ha. You won't G nor ha." Now, anyone's from the South, anybody recognize that term? Okay. That was when you were plowing with the mule. And if you wanted the mule to go left, I think it was, is it right? Go or stop, or left or go or stop. You said, "Gee," and the mule would go. "Ha," and the mule would stop. So I realized earlier on that no matter what I did, I could neither G nor ha. White folks would say that it was wrong, and confused black folks would too. Because people were so mesmerized in trying to follow an illusory standard. And if you followed that standard, it completely eliminated your humanity. So I sing because I'm happy. And I sing because I'm free. His eyes is on the sparrow, and I know he watches over me. Thank you, Sarah Vaughan. So today, I know Max, thank you, Max, for inviting me to do this. But since Max invited me, he's been missing in action. I've never even shook his hand. And this, it reminds me of a time when I was a dean at Harvard, and they were going to do a conference on librarianship. It was the annual librarianship conference, and someone came with a brilliant idea. We should focus on gospel music this year at this conference. That might be quite enlightening to the community. So I was on the committee, and they said, Larry, and so somebody in the back before I could speak said, oh, I think it would be an incredible idea for us to invite Grace Bumbry. And I, before I knew it, went back to my Bedford-Stuyvesant roots. I said, what? Grace Bumbry? Grace Bumbry is an incredible opera singer, but she has nothing to do with gospel. Why would you invite Grace Bumbry? What is it, all blacks look alike? We all can do the same thing. Just take anyone. And so that has nothing to do with you, Max. I'm going to tell you what it has to do with you, because I'm straight up. So I said, you have to invite Shirley Caesar. Now, I don't know whether you all know that name. That's some more homework. Shirley Caesar's won more Grammys than anyone in the field of gospel. And Shirley Caesar is the queen of gospel music. And so I said, we have to invite Shirley Caesar. But Shirley Caesar, you know, she goes all the way back, takes her shoes off while she's singing, shouts across the stage. So the people at Harvard weren't really, first of all, they didn't know who she was. But secondly, would that be appropriate for the Memorial Church? So we got the okay to bring Shirley Caesar in. And when Shirley Caesar arrived at Memorial Church, she arrived at Memorial Church and she said, where's Peter Gomes? Where's Peter Gomes? I want to meet Peter Gomes. Where's Peter Gomes? Peter Gomes was way in the back of the church, waving like this. He hears Shirley said, Peter! In Memorial Church. And Peter never came near Shirley, but you're going to come near me before this day is over, okay? Now, the second thing is, when I got into into Harvard Square, there were little old black ladies getting off the train in Harvard Square. They said, son, do you know where there's a building someplace around here called Memorial Church? They didn't know nothing about that institution, and they didn't care. Because I'm coming tonight to see Shirley Caesar. I heard Shirley Caesar's here. It's all about perspective. And when we got in that church, people were hanging off the balconies to see Shirley Caesar. Complete different perspective. And Peter was in the back of the room. And so Shirley was saying, hi, Peter. But there was never a photo between Peter and Shirley Caesar. I'll leave you all to figure that out. I want to say that in addition to the great Dorothy Donegan that I hope you all will listen to go on YouTube and watch her brilliance, she would always say, Larry, in the day, we had to play dead to get ahead. That's what black musicians would say. She would say that when the president's daughter, I'll be careful not to say which president, was one of the older presidents that's no longer with us, they would come because everyone loved to hear jazz in the clubs. And she said once she showed them that she was as versed in European classical music, you notice I say, well, let me do this. That's what I do to my students. Give me an example of a classical composer or a classical song. Yes. Beethoven, yes. Mozart, yes. That's okay, you can say the same thing, I'm not picky. Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, Eric Copeland. Beethoven, it's fine. You can't, really? You really can't? That's very interesting, yes. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes. I could go through this whole room and almost all of you would give me an example with a few exceptions of a European composer or European music, because Europe has co-opted the term classical. And if you read in the dictionary some of the definitions they give, they're so absolutely Eurocentric and insidiously racist, because every society has classical music. And classical music is synonymous with indigenous or traditional music. And so I do this exercise with my students, and because one phase of European music is the classical period, we just make everybody else a caboose to the train. And so then all of a sudden people say to me, oh, when they hear me sing, so, were you classically trained? And I say, yes, I was. They say, oh, by who? I said, by the black church. And then they get all up unnatural about it. They just can't, is he crazy? You know? And so I do this exercise, and then after I do it with a diverse group of students, I turn back to my Indian students and say, is there any classical Indian music? And they, in their dark skin, still turn beet red. And they say, yes. I said, why didn't you mention it? Well, because, and I go to my Korean students, I say, is there classical Korean music? And they say yes, and they start to give examples. So I used to do this example just to show how the language is so loaded and the words are so biased without us even knowing it. Then you get the people who start to argue with me about it. They start to get into an argument. But when you read some of the definitions from various dictionaries, they say things like good music, complex music. And you begin to realize that all around us is this kind of white-centered approach to the world, to everything we do. It is another microaggression. So I took this same exercise into the hood. I was working with a group of Black and Latino kids from Roxbury, and I did my little exercise. Yeah, brother, you can sit there. Yes. And I did my little exercise, and I went around the room, and I said, and I started saying, can you give me an example of some classical music, classical composers? And they said, Kool Moe Dee. And they started to mention all these hip-hop artists. And I was done because my whole thing had fallen apart, maybe. And they went Melly Mel, and they went down, they started naming all of these because for them, life starts with hip-hop, and the people who they admire who were the traditionalists were the James Browns and the Melly Mels and others. And it was mind-opening even for me to see it's all about perspective and power or lack thereof. And that's why the hip-hop generation, after 40 years of music, some of it very toxic, but a lot of it as a reaction in a form of protest to everything being the center of it being Europe. And so I do that sometimes with my students. And it's a revelation what happens. So Dorothy Donegan would say, if I showed them, Larry, I could play European, and that's why I put the adjective, I make it very clear. And when my students say, I'm classically trained, I say, oh, in what genre, what field, who, by what? And they look like, what is he? Isn't he a music teacher? And so she said, when we played European classical, they wouldn't come back. And soon thereafter, we'd be fired. This was in the 40s, 30s and 40s. She said, we had to play dead to get ahead. Well, she played dead to get ahead. I'm not playing dead to get ahead because I recognize who I am and who the people who came before me are. And my bottom line of it is that if people with power are going to get rid of you, they're going to get rid of you. So here's another unmuting. I was a dean at Harvard for 5 years. If you stay at Harvard for more than a year, you're competent, you're doing your job, because they don't play there. You have to go. And at the end of my stay, my visit, my job, and for those of you in higher education, I was the administrative dean for faculty affairs. You never eliminate the dean for faculty affairs. That will be into the end of time. My job was eliminated because of a reshuffling of administrative duties. Now, not only was my job eliminated, and then I did what nobody else had ever done in the history of the institution as an administrator. I filed a grievance. And people said, oh, no. No one files a grievance against Harvard. So I went to the director of personnel, and I said to her at the time, now that was the director of personnel, that was not a head of legal counsel. Who is a head of legal counsel
is our former governor's wife, who was a wonderful lady. Love her very much. Knew her back in the day. We still, Diane Patrick. And whenever I see her, we just have body language, and we know what we're talking about without even saying the words. And so I went into the personnel director at Harvard, and in those days I wore the three-piece suits, but I did have the Grace Jones haircut with the angles and stuff. I couldn't go all the way. I couldn't go all the way. And I wore that Grace Jones haircut, and I had bought, for those of you who are animal lovers, don't condemn me, don't hate me, I had found in an old rummage sale a long raccoon coat to the floor. So when I started working at Harvard and I got the job, I did three things. I put that raccoon coat on, I had that angular haircut, and I lived in Dorchester. And people say, hey, where are you going to live? Aren't you going to live in Harvard Square? I said, oh, no. I have to live in Dorchester, Roxbury. They said, but why? I said, because every night I come home when I'm through with you all, I want to see folks drunk and stumbling and people in the street and laughing. I want to continue to see all sides of my experience and not be ashamed of it. Very good. I wanted to be able to walk home at night and recognize that I was living in a community. It didn't have any ATMs. It didn't have any drugstores after 5 o'clock. It didn't have any supermarkets, but I could only reconcile being at Harvard if, in fact, I stayed rooted, because I knew I was not going to be one of those confused black people from Alabama or Mississippi who all of a sudden was speaking in a French accent and working at Harvard. And so I lived and stayed there. So when I went to see the director person, I said, I've been pushed, literally 6'3" black man by a little 5'3" man, pushed, told off, all this unbelievable stuff that no one would believe. And I said, what am I to do? I need you to take action. And she said to me, these white men are not going to chastise or get rid of one of their own. So you just have to resign and leave. And I stood up, all 6'3" of me, and I looked at her and I did this.
And I am telling you, I'm not going. Even though the times are changing fast. She started to grip the furniture. No way, there's no way. I said, tear down the mountains, beg, scream, and shout. You can say what you want. I'm not walking out. Tear down the rivers, push, fight, and kill. I'm not gonna leave you. There's no way I will. And I am telling you, I'm not going.
For those of you who don't know, that's a song from Dreamgirls that Jennifer Holliday sang. And I put my jacket on, and I walked out. I knew then I had 6 months at the most, because I knew that story was going to go all around campus, and I wanted it to. So then the next step was to file the grievance. On my grievance committee was the dean of the medical school, the late Derek Bell, who was one of my mentors. One of my best friends, Charles Ogletree, who's now challenged by Alzheimer's. And they listened to that testimony of me. And I was Anita Hill at that hearing. And I was telling the story with all of that poise, no emotion. Always talking about black people doing things from the waist down, kicking ass and dancing and good in bed. I was the head up, I was articulate. I was visionary and I was telling us, Derek Bell was just looking at me. So the next day at the hearing, when I went to testify, he didn't tell me anything. When I started to testify and said this happened and this was said to me and all of these insidious, horrible things, and Derek Bell leaned up to me and said, Larry, why did you take it? Why did you stay there, son? And I said, and broke down and started crying. The one thing I didn't want to do. I said, because my father stayed and his father stayed. And so many people stayed because we needed to stay to prove who we were. And the committee said, that's enough for today, and they cut it off. That's enough for today. And I was so angry with Derek. I said, why did you do that to me? He said, because you was being too stoic about it. I wanted them to see the real emotion about what you went through. You had to see that. Now, in retrospect, Derek was wrong, because that was still appealing to the conscience. And I'm convinced after Tangerine Man, Agent Orange heading this country, that there is no longer an American conscience. One of my dear friends and colleagues told me the other day about a book he was reading about what happened in South Africa in the reconciliation hearings. Reconciliation, I believe they were called, yes. And how one of the great activists said, you want to look people in the face and allow them to acknowledge human being to human being what they did. And that's what Derek Bell was doing. I don't believe that anymore. I believe some of the ruthlessness we see going on day to day in this country makes me doubt that there is evil in the land. And some of the specialists in diversity counseling and training place us in 5 categories. Many of you may have heard this before. The first are perpetrators. Perpetrators are homophobic, racist, sexist, hateful people that would even put their own children at risk and their neighbors just to get back at the one, quote, nigger living in the neighborhood. Perpetrators. Conservative statistics suggest that about 10% of the population are perpetrators. So when we see the escalation of the Klan by mostly white women, and we see some of these horrendous crimes going on against synagogues and churches being burned down and trans women being slaughtered and murdered, part of that comes from the perpetrators. But the next category is what we call avoiders. That's what's got me pissed off in saying that the coalition is broken. Because avoiders say things like, you don't have to raise your hand if these are some of your others' friends. I don't like talking about politics. I don't like talking about religion. I think we should avoid that. I think we should just, can't we just all get along? There's a huge number of people in this society that are avoiders because you have something to lose, and that's when white privilege and wannabe Negro privilege kicks in. You have made it into the inner house and you're not leaving because you have that mortgage to pay. And once they've chosen you because you're one of the palatable Negroes, then you've made it. And I see so much of that. So, I'm going all the way, y'all. I'm not. So that's the second category, is avoiders. Then you have the next category. Naive offenders. Zakia, can you come from? Naive offenders. I'm just so moved by what you all have been through, but we're such good friends. Can I just touch your, Naive offenders who feel the need to objectify me like I'm some kind of animal in the zoo. Now I want you to add up perpetrators, avoiders, and naive offenders. That's a lot of people. And we've allowed the avoiders, the perpetrators, and the naive offenders to be the ones at the center of running this country. And we have the gall to justify part of it or to call it the base. So the base can be racist and homophobic and hateful and everything else. And we say, you hear people say, but I don't know other people are going to be able to beat the base. And so every day I watch something more atrocious than the day before. I watch laws be violated. I watch senators turn out closed meetings and say to myself, if that was a black senator, they would have roped his ass up and took him out of here. But we sit back and we make excuses, and it is we, because as the great Jewish scholar and rabbi said, some of us, some are guilty, Joshua Heschel, Abraham Joshua, some are guilty, but all are responsible. And if you allowed it to happen, I don't care how liberal you think you are guilty. And either you're responsible to have said something, or there comes a time when it's no time for talking, it's time for action. And we know that even when statisticians are doing research, if you're quiet, then you get counted with the most conservative point of view. Because radicals don't wait to speak out because they were appointed. They speak out because they have to. They don't do it for ego. Then the last two categories that they tell us are change agents. We should all at a minimum be change agents. But then there's people like Derek Bell, the late Derek Bell, Charles Ogletree, the woman I met when I first came here to Boston that I dedicate this program to today, Elma Lewis. These were fighters. That don't mean that they were perfect, but they were willing to risk it all for what was socially just and right. Everybody can't be the same, but I'm not going to take 2 steps back waiting for somebody to say, may I? Because life is too short, and I have less summers in front of me than behind me. And so this year, I used to never talk about this, only because I wasn't afraid of it or insecure about it, but because of the bias. If I went to try out for the part or something and I didn't know how old I was, I just wouldn't get the part, even though good black don't crack. I turned 67 last week or 2 weeks ago. So I'm old enough now, and I've done so much behind me that I don't have time to be making apologies because other people's light is dim and my light is too bright. As I heard one woman say, get you some sunglasses because I'm not turning down my light. And it's not about ego. It's about recognizing that you have forgotten, I have forgotten more than a lot of people know, young people. And so I'm going to stand in my space with responsibility. I'm going to check. The other night, my mother has dementia. And I was home dealing with her and my aunt, her sister, a year apart. They're both are suffering badly. And my mother, when we left the house, she kept looking at her bag. I said, what are you doing? What are you doing? I'm looking for my keys. And I took the keys and I gave them, I said, here's your keys. 2 minutes later, I said, what are you doing? I'm looking for my keys. I said, put the keys around your neck. She put the keys around her neck. I'm driving. 2 minutes later, what are you doing, Mama? I'm looking for my keys. I said, Mama, the keys are around your neck. Just hold on to them, Mama, while I'm driving. And just hold on to them for 5 minutes. She hold on to them. She takes the other hand, starts looking at the back. I said, what are you doing? I'm looking for my keys. I had lost patience But this is when I believe there's a universal God or spirit or energy that when you're doing things the right way and you get out of line, that energy will talk to you. I call them my guardian angels. One of the people who used to come to this church is a dear friend of mine who mentored me, and I wouldn't be who I am today if it wasn't for Dr. Loretta Williams. Many of you remember her. My life is less than it was. Another one was my good friend. I call her my Jewish Lena Horn friend. Her name was Nancy Tobin. She was a Jewish woman that lived in Wellesley, and she looked like Nancy Wilson, so white folks would get in front of her and start talking about Jews and being anti-Semitic, thinking that she was black. And she would say, "Excuse me, I'm Jewish," and then she cussed them out. And Nancy Tobin would be the one that I would run when I was getting ready to go off or getting ready to write something that was a little out of control. I would have her to read it as the Jewish waspy woman that lived in Wellesley. So she would read it and be able to tell me, "I know you should tone this down, you should do this." And then I would, depending who I was writing it to, I would make those changes. And when I took the memoir I wrote back to this little dean that pushed me and stuff, he would still find something wrong with it. Then I knew, yep, there it is, because Nancy read it. I had Nancy to read it as well. And so I would take it back to her and say, "Nancy, he rejected it." And then she would be stuck because she didn't want to have to acknowledge how hard life was for me. That pained her when she was in hospice. She cried and she said to me in hospice, "Larry, I've met with my white friends from Harvard and others, and you all have no idea the lack of respect they have for you all in thinking that black folks can't do it because of slavery." On her deathbed, she revealed something to me that was unbearably painful. And that last category, as I said, of fighters like Elma Lewis and Charles Ogletree and Nancy Tobin, people who surround, and John Ross. And we didn't always agree, but at the core of and Ruth Batson, I was very fortunate when I came to Boston that I met all these people and many others who embraced me. And you know, if any of you know, I'm being unmuted, in many instances you was either in the Elma Lewis camp or you was in the Ruth Batson camp. I was in both. I had that special privilege. I remember taking Ruth Batson to eat at the place in Saugus with them big cows. What was it called? Yes, and I was taking her on a date with some other people. I was and I got lost and ended up in New Hampshire because I didn't know how to drive. And Ruth Barnes looked at me and said, "I know my daughters are never going to forgive me for this, being here with you, and I don't even know who you are, and you got us in New Hampshire. What would make me be so stupid as to get in this car with you?" Well, I quickly found my way to that restaurant. And so there are stories that I won't delay, but I want to say that we all have to look back at our foundation and our roots and recognize the people who brought us through to that side. So I stand here with you today. But when that report came out from Harvard, after Derek Bell did that to me, the report was released, or was private. Maybe I'm not supposed to tell it, but that's okay. And the report said, I'm not giving specificity, but I'm telling it. It was many years ago. And they said in the report, not only was my employee rights violated, but my human rights were violated. And President Derek Bach, who was an ethicist by training, wrote back and said, "I didn't ask you about his human rights. I don't want to know whether the layoff was legal and whether we can do it. I don't want to know about his human rights." That's when I knew it was time to leave, one way or the other. They had already put me out, but all it was a time to do was move on and not be walking through Harvard Square with a bag of memos talking about I'm suing Harvard, with saliva dripping down my mouth, bent over crazy that I'm suing Harvard. And so I left. And what I'm probably not supposed to talk about is that little thing they call a settlement, so I won't go into all those details. And then I really caught hell, because the first job I had after leaving that was director of anti-racism training for faculty and community affairs at one of these independent private schools in Boston. That's when I realized where they make them at. Being a little boy from the ghetto, I had no idea what private independent schools offer. Now, let me tell you a story about that. I'm so bold, I called up Jonathan Cazal, who wrote Death at an Early Age, because I wanted him to speak for my community affairs, for my community affairs, homelessness. They were doing a program, the theme was homelessness. So I called up Jonathan Cazal, who wrote Death at an Early Age and Savage Inequalities, and I found the whitest white woman from Weston who was homeless and who was living in her Mercedes with her kids so they could stay in the high school in Weston. Her husband had left her. She was Mrs. blah, blah, blah. She had no bank accounts. She had nothing, and he left her, and so she lived in her car, in her Mercedes, with her 3 kids so they could stay in the Weston High School. So when I brought her there to speak that morning, everybody said, well, weren't you doing something on homelessness? I said, yes. They said, where's the keynote speaker? I said, there she is sitting over there in, what you call them suits that all the president's wives wear, not St. John, Chanel. I said, there she is sitting over there in her Chanel suit. Y'all know about Chanel suits, right? And so they said, but I don't, I said, and she got up and told her story. And she told how she got so many other opportunities because people were embarrassed to see a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant woman with a Mercedes homeless with her kids. That didn't fit well with whites. And so being in the school, Jonathan Cazal called me up. He never calls anybody. He called and said, is this Larry Watson? And I said, yes. He said, why are you teaching at that school? Why are you there? Did you read Paul Laurence Dunbar? Have you read Du Bois? Have you blah, blah, blah? And he just kind of let it go. He just said, I can't even understand why you would even be in a place like that. As I did my research, it was alleged, and I'll be very careful about this, that in the earlier days of this institution, which I will not mention, but y'all have figured it out, they would initiate Jewish boys by sodomizing them. That is the allegation. So hatred and evil, you can look it straight in the face, but it sometimes doesn't blink. It was that experience, along with my Ivy League experience of being at Cornell and Harvard, and then being at this independent school, that made me really see what evil and what liberals could be. So I made a video to try to show them who they were so they could help those Black and Latino and gay students at the school. And what I did is superimposed national events. So I had Maxine Waters talking about racism in the Congress. And then after the piece on Maxine Waters would play, then I'd show a scene from the school where I'd interviewed the students and they had told the exact same story of what happened to them. People in the cafeteria trying to tell them how to use a fork and a knife. And they said, I know how to use a damn fork and knife, Professor Watson. The meat was tough. And so I picked it up to eat it with my hand. And they thought I was some savage that didn't know how to use a fork and a knife that my mother had never taught me. So I put those back to back. And my friend, Dr. Loretta Williams, who was doing the work with me, she said, Larry, don't show the film. This is when I let ego get in the way. I'm showing this film. They're gonna see what they've done to these kids. She said, Larry, the time is not right. Don't show the film. I hit the play button, bam. The film started. One of the librarians, she jumped up, she ran out, they all started crying. I wasn't crying. I was almost snickering. And this is the part that was sick on my part to a degree, but I wanted them to feel the burn. I wanted to know what they had done to these kids that had no voice. When the film got through showing, they said, how could you have done this to us? I said, how could you have done this to these children? We weren't ready for this. I said, but neither were they ready. Well, too bad, they just have to wait. After that was over, no one said another word to me for the rest of the semester. I had no more assignments. I sat up in my office with nothing to do for 5 months. They smiled and passed by me, and on the last day when my contract was up, they gave me a gift, and it was all done. And I realized, wow, there's another way that this stuff is done. It was one of the most painful periods in my life, so painful that I directed a play there, first black musical in the history of the campus. And the black kids in the play, it was a play that was on Broadway for a brief time and in Brooklyn at the Billie Holiday Theater. The play was called Innocent Black and the Five Brothers. And so it had 5 black male leads or actors playing black men and 3 women. So one of the lines in the play was, boy, the mother says, if you don't stop what you're doing, I'll beat the black off of you. And the Indian young man that I had cast in the part, who was darker than me, said, Professor Watson, could you change that line to brown? Because we as Indian people, we're not black. We don't have, and so I said, well, first of all, it's illusion because you're playing a part. You're an actor playing a part. I said, but secondly, are you suggesting to me that if you lived in Switzerland or Sweden for 8 months that you would become white? And so what happened is the black kids in the play, so persecuted for being in this all-black production, wrote a letter to the school newspaper saying that they were forced to be in the play and that they felt it was racist also, but they went ahead and did it. I was so hurt because the black kids, one by one, came to me in my office crying and saying, our peers and some people in administration had us to write that letter. And I thought, what damage are we doing to young black and brown children in these independent private schools, only for it to be continued when they get to the Ivy Leagues, only for it then to kill them when they go to corporate America or in higher education. So I feel compelled to tell some of those stories through music, but to also talk about me being a black boy who grew up in Bedford-Stuyvesant in the projects, and remembering that my earliest memory is being in a summer camp, and we had a young white counselor who was working with us, all black kids, and we were like 5 or 6, 4, 5, 6, and we were playing tag, where you'd run and tag the person. And so Larry Watson, everybody was tagging each other, but I wanted to tag the teacher. So I went to tag the teacher. Every time he would back and said, no, don't touch me. So the more he said, don't touch me, the more I was going to touch him. And so finally I grabbed him and laughed, and he said, don't you put your black, surly, nasty hands on me. He said, don't you put your black, surly, nasty hands on me. He said, black is the devil. And he went off. I was like 5 years old. And I went home and told my mother. And my mother said, look who's sitting there. How you doing? Not you. You got to calm down. This is one of my former students right here. How you doing? This is so great to see you. So anyway, I'm gonna sing the next song. I'm gonna be done. Okay, good. Okay. So my mother went up and she spoke, and the next day the man was gone. But that stuck with me for years. Only then to go to high school and have New York University to do a film of my high school called The Way It Was, The Way It Is. If anybody can find that film who's in education and has an affiliation with NYU, please find it for me. It was done by NYU School of Education, and it was called The Way It Is. And we were so excited as kids at Junior High School 57 in Bedford-Stuyvesant to have this film done in our school. And we all got home that night on Channel 13 PBS. I'm gonna come to that. That's how I'm gonna end this. Because I used to be on a show called Sing That Thing. So I'm gonna end that with this in a minute. And so we waited that night looking at TV, and it opened up with some black music, and then a little black woman opened the door and said, I haven't gone to check my mail in 10 years. I'm scared to leave the house because all of the violence and all of the robbery and theft in this community. And I got scared. Then I realized I was living next door to her. It was the same neighborhood, but this is the role of the electronic, social, and print media. So I went to school the next day. I was in the 7th or 8th grade, and I demanded to see the principal. The show went on to be even worse than that with what they showed. We weren't doing any reading. We just savages. And I said to him, how could you allow this to happen to us? I'm getting ready to apply to high school, and I want to know how could you, and he said to me, well, tonight, Larry, we've been invited to a premiere of a new movie that stars Sidney Poitier. And the whole school and all the teachers have been invited, and I'd like to extend an invitation to you to join the teachers. The movie was called To Serve with Love. These fools thought that by showing inner city black teachers To Serve with Love, that would help them to better understand black children. So I went to the premiere that night. I had never been across the Manhattan or Williamsburg Bridge, because a lot of people from Brooklyn never leave Brooklyn. You know, they're black and Latino people who've lived there their whole lives and never left. That's right. Same with people in Manhattan and the Bronx. And so they were serving something that I couldn't pronounce the name. Later on, I know that the name was hors d'oeuvres, but how do black folks used to say it when they saw the name? Right. Who is their boy? I love it. So I was like, who is their boy? So I started eating these little things, and I thought, oh my God, I'm in heaven. But then I went back the next morning and cussed that principal out. I said, you thought you could buy me with who's divorced? No, I think what you did was atrocious. I don't like it. And that's when my activism came into its own, because then I met Shirley Chisholm. When that book came out, Unbossed, in my freshman year, Shirley Chisholm came to speak on campus, and I got to introduce her. And then years later at Harvard, when I was a dean, she came again, and I sang for her. So when I was telling you a story about my mother and the keys, I'm gonna tell you how things talk to you. The next day, I took my mother's keys from her to go out. And I went out and I went to the bank to deposit her money. And when I left the bank, I couldn't find the keys. And I said, oh God, if I go home and tell my mother I lost these keys, it'll kill her and it'll kill me too. And I'm looking for the keys, and I'm getting all frustrated. The keys were around my neck. The universe will talk to you if you're open to hear the universe. That was my God and my angel saying, don't get too cute now, because you could forget and put them around your neck too. It was a very powerful moment. But I'll say to you all that throughout my life, I've tried to, in the work I do, and I love the work I do with the students I've had over the years, like Desmond Scaife. I say, I'm so surprised to see you here. I thought you were in New York. Oh my goodness. So this is a powerful thing. But I want to end here by saying no matter how old you get, these are the things that happen and why I am very suspicious of the coalition. Some of you may remember or used to watch it. I used to do a show called Sing That Thing on PBS, WGBH. And all of a sudden I'm not there anymore. And I did a really good job according to the public that would stop me in the streets. Stop me. Well, here we go. This is me being teacher with you all now. So my mother came up from New York to be checked for Alzheimer's and dementia. And I had not heard from GBH, liberal GBH, PBS, liberal coalition. So I called the producer, the executive producer, and I said, I haven't heard from you all, and I want to get this on my calendar, because when you tape a show like that for the whole year, you do it all in 2 days. And so you have to get it on your calendar. Even every week it's shown, you taped it all in one afternoon, and you had all the people, or 2 afternoons. And so she said, oh, Larry, hi. I said, yeah, I got on speakerphone. Not for any reason other than I'm sitting there talking to my mom, and I just happened to have it on speakerphone. And my mother's in her condition. I said, yeah. I said, I just wanted to get on my calendar. She said, oh, yeah, my mother had Alzheimer's dementia. She died from that. So my mother's sitting there. My mother heard that. She said, yeah, she died from that. And she said, well, anyway, the reason I didn't call you yet is because we've had major budget cuts. They don't want me to have 5 cameras anymore. They want me to have 1 camera, 2. They want me to pay for the pencils. They want me to, it's just crazy. I'm thinking, wow, I don't know. She says, so we're not gonna, she says, and plus, we also got rid of the announcer, who was a black guy. We got rid of the announcer. I said, oh, I'm sorry to hear. She said, yeah, he's gonna replace you. We're going to give him your job because we don't need an announcer, and he'll be one of the critics. I said, oh, okay. And then she said this, peek your ears, PBS, GBH, besides, comma, we couldn't have 2 black men on the show at the same time anyway. Let me say it again. Besides, comma, we couldn't have 2 black men on the show at the same time anyway. I've been waiting to tell this story in the right forum, but in the meantime, I've used it as a teachable moment with my students. Let me say it again. Besides, comma, we couldn't have 2 black men on the show at the same time anyway. What would have been your response?
What would you do? Please send your responses to SaveOurSelvesProductions@gmail.com. Enjoy the rest of this podcast.
I don't feel no waist higher. I've come too far from where I started from. Nobody told me the road would be easy. I don't believe he brought me this far to leave me. And then black folks will sing it over and over like a mantra. And they sing it differently. I don't feel no waste tired. I've come too far, Lord, from where I started from. Nobody told me that the road would be easy. I don't believe he brought me this far to leave me. Sing it one time, DJ, your way. Believe he brought me this far. Sing it. I don't believe he brought me this far. I don't believe he brought
We have to pass the torch to the next generation. As DJ sits here today, he had a horrible experience to occur to him before he left Boston and Berklee. But the way the universe works out, he ended up taking residence in my home and my mother's home in New York, and those two have become the best of friends. And when DJ and I were in China together, it was DJ's first long 6-week international experience, and by the 4th week he was done. He was ready to come home. I was too, but I'm old. And DJ said, I got to go home, Larry. And I said, we're gonna go home in 2 weeks. He said, I miss my best friend. And I was like, he said, I miss Mama Thelma, my mother. And while he's been there, he's videotaped her going back and telling the stories that I now have that she had, of cooking all day as a 15-year-old girl for a white family, putting her hands all in their food. And when the food was finished, they made her eat on the porch as they sat to the table and ate. And she's now 87, 88. She still tells that story. And she says to DJ after she's told that story, I feel so much better, DJ, telling that story. It is so wrong in 2019 for us to be under the kind of siege that we are in this country. And that I don't want those stories and your stories and my stories to be in vain, because we didn't choose collectively, not just mirroring ourselves, our little safe zone of people who think like us, but having the bold tenacity to step out and to talk to those who don't agree with you and those who spew hate on your jobs, in your community, even in your churches. We've got to do better, and it is because of this song and because of DJ and other young students and people I see here in Alvin that I have confidence that that's possible. I haven't lost it all. Please don't misconstrue anything I said today as demonstrating that I have given up. But it is clear for you to understand the power of the oral tradition and oral history, and that these are the shoes that Black folks walk in every day, and we keep moving forward. So thank you for having us today, and we'll stay around for a while. I know I'm probably over my time, but that's okay, because Black ministers and Black speakers don't ever fall within that confine. We just can't. So thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in to SOS Podcast. For more information, you can follow us at SaveOurSelvesProductions.com or email SaveOurSelvesProductions@gmail.com for further information. Thank you, and stay tuned for another episode of Larry Watson Unmuted.